Hello, everybody, and today we're going to look at the Scotch game, and we're going to mostly focus on the move 5 bishop e3. So, how does Scotch game arise? Well, we start with e4, e5. White is bringing the pawn to the center, the king's pawn. We are replying with the same move, just mirroring white. But after knight f3, which is targeting the pawn on e5. We're going for knight c6 to defend the pawn on e5. And here d4. It means that something is going to happen, some Scotch gambit or Scotch game. And after e takes d4, if white is not taking, we're going to have Scotch gambit. If white is capturing with a knight on d4, then we're having Scotch game. So basically, this is a starting position. Generally, what does this opening bring for white is, of course, that the pawn in the center is on e4. It's targeting the d5 square. The main points from black is to challenge the center at some moment, trying moves like d5 and f5. Of course, not instantly, it's not really working out, but surely we have to go for them at some moment. Or most likely we're going to develop with like knight f6, castle, developing the bishop out to c5 or e7, it depends, castle. Yes, but here, these are the normal moves, but here we're going for the move bishop c5. So this variation is immediately asking some questions of white. So this is kind of a disadvantage of the position of white. So the knight played two moves, is in the center and being attacked by the bishop and the knight off from black. So now white has to do something with this knight. Either move it away or take our knight or defend it. So in this chapter, we're going to look at bishop e3 move mainly. This is a traditional main line, basically at the same time defending the knight on d4, developing the bishop. There are a lot of pros about this move, and also creating potential a threat of taking with a knight on c6, so that after take on c6, bishop can capture the knight, the bishop on c5. Let's make some move, something like knight f6, for example. After knight c6, we have a problem since our queen is under attack. And after take, then there is bishop c5, and we're down a whole piece. So that's why we have to react accordingly. There are different moves, but in this position, we're going for queen f6. Queen x6 is immediately asking a question to the knight. Once again, we're attacking it with a third piece, and white again has to do something about this knight. Normally, white is just defending with a pawn playing c3, but there are also the moves with a knight, moving the knight away. It may seem at the first glance a bit illogical to develop the queen on the f6, but the idea of this move that at some moments we can bring the queen to g6, targeting the g2 weakness. It's not really weakness, but g2 square, and also e4 at the same time. Also, our idea is, of course, first of all, now there is no anymore this threat of taking on c6 as it was before, winning the bishop. And also is developing the queen. Normally, we don't really develop the queen early in the opening according to the rules and principles of the opening, but in this particular case, in this particular opening, this is completely normal standard move. So knight b5 is the first move we're going to look at. Removing the knight away and attacking the pawn on c7 makes a lot of sense, but unfortunately it's pretty dubious move. The problem is that even though the c7 is a problem for black, we have an intermediate bishop takes e3, and after pawn takes, because pawn has to retake, because after knight 7 we're going to play king d8, and we are going to win a piece or checkmate our opponent. So that's why white has to take on e3. Now there is already a double pawn structure, and here we go for a very thematic idea. When there is such pawn structure in the center, we give a check on h4. Queen h4, attacking the king and also the pawn. So now there is basically the only move which defends the king is g3, but if white is playing king d2, which is also possible because it's not too bad of a move actually, but played pretty rarely. Now we play king d8. We defend with the king the pawn on c7, we don't really give a chance of taking on c7 by the knight. And now after queen f3, queen is developed, defending the pawn on e4, at the same time attacking the pawn on f7. Now we go knight f6, also defending by blocking the file, defending the pawn on f7 and attacking the pawn on e4. So now knight 1 to c3, very logical, developing the piece and defending at the same time. And now a6 is the key move in the position, because now basically white is kicking out that knight. There is not going to be an issue on c7 any longer. And what to do with white? I mean, there is only one active move, knight d4, because we don't really want to bring, I mean, white doesn't really want to bring knight on the edge of the board. So knight d4 makes a lot of sense, but now there is a sequence of moves which is happening. But after knight d4, e4, I would like first to ask you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. I hope you found it. It's pretty, it's very tempting to play this move. So we're going for the d5 break. If we can go for it, we are going for it. So the main idea of this, that after take on d5, the pawn on d4 is going to be vulnerable, and we have a queen on h4. So here white could try, for example, to defend the pawn first, not to take on d5. But then after rook e1, we captured the pawn, knight e4, and now queen h6 check, not allowing king to escape on c1. King goes to c3, and now after knight d5 check, king d3, rook e8. The king is standing in the center. Our king is much more safer. It's not being attacked. But we have pieces which are jumping into the game very, very soon. Our rook is creating this very nice pin. We're going to have also the bishop, which most likely later is going to join the game, or also it could join via the... no, actually, it cannot join via a6 because we have a pawn there. But we definitely have a bishop which is ready to jump into the game. Let's say with bishop d7, bishop b5 as well, knight b4, many other moves. King is in the center. It's still not clear how to finish the development on the king side for white. And once again, the position is just much better for black. And actually, according to computer, it's winning. So e takes d4, another d5, another option. It looks like the queen d4 move is very tempting, but we're going to help white a lot. If we're going to play queen takes d4, then we're going to help white with development, bishop d3, and then king most likely is going to hide. So first, we play an intermediate move. We go for rook e8. So rook e8 move, first of all, introducing a threat of queen g5 and queen h6, because then there are not going to be many squares left for a king to escape, and queen will not be able to block the check. So that's why the move which makes sense for white is g3, attacking the queen on h4, and at the same time reacting to the threat of queen g5, queen h6 by answering it with queen f4, blocking the check. So that's why, since it's not working any longer, now we are taking the pawn on d4, bishop d3, logical, trying to defend. And now we go with the bishop to g4. Now queen cannot really go to e3 or anywhere closer because of our rook, so it's very good. And now queen goes to f4, offering a queen trade. In this position, again, even though we're attacking the king, and it feels like, all right, we shouldn't really trade queens, but looking more, we can see that attack is not really going anywhere any longer, and well, there are many pieces which are defending the white's king. So actually trade makes a lot of sense, because after the trade, we play king e7, we move the king to the king side. There are going to be weaknesses on d5, f4 from white. Potential also h pawn is isolated pawn, so it also could be a weakness. And in the endgame, we have huge chances due to this pawn structure, which is much weaker for white. So that was king d2 move. So g3 looks more logical, challenging the queen, asking it where does it want to go. We take the pawn on e4, of course, with a tempo, attacking the rook. So now, now there is a question from white what actually to do, because there is also knight c7 move, or there is a move knight 1 c3. So let's start with knight 1 c3, attacking the queen, defending and supporting the knight. And after queen takes on h1, then it feels like kind of the queen is cannot really go away, escape from there. But actually, it's not really true. So queen h1, we are trying to test white. We are taking the rook. So now knight c7, also capturing the rook, makes a lot of sense. Knight f6, queen d6, immediately creating many threats. By the way, knight f6 is pretty important move. Sometimes there is a e7 square for the king to escape. So queen f3, we're going with the queen back, and we're actually going to transpose to the line which starts with knight takes c7 and king d8. So we're going to see it now. So knight c7, king d8. So we are transposing to this position. First, let's look at move knight c3. Knight c3, knight f6, queen d6, queen f3, and again, we transpose to the same position. We're going to see it just in a moment. Let's start first with queen g4, and then we're going to go for queen d6. Queen g4 targeting the g7 immediately makes a lot of sense. Also bringing the queen, activating the queen. But now there is a very nice move, knight e7, which is very tricky. So of course, if we play something like knight f6, then the problem is going to be that all pieces are attacked and we are going to lose material. So knight g7, very important move. So here, let's start with queen f4. So queen f4 is, of course, targeting the c7 square. Also, it's targeting the pawn on f7. So let's say we play here knight d5. So the main idea is to stop the check on c7 and also introducing threats of taking on e3 if queen moves away. So queen g5, going on g5 with a check and feeling like, all right, it's a double attack at the same time. But here we have knight c7 defending from the check, and one knight is enough to defend the king. And meanwhile, we're going to have, again, some threats of taking on e3 later, of course, once queen moves away, in case queen moves away somewhere. Again, there is still this knight standing on a8, which we're most likely going to take later in the endgame. It's still trapped on a8. So what happens after queen g7? Makes a lot of sense. But now rook g8, targeting the queen, winning a tempo. Queen h7, winning another pawn, being a bit too greedy, but at the same time defending a pawn on h2. We play queen f3, bringing the queen out. And after queen d3, we have knight b4, attacking the queen, attacking the pawn on c2. So now after queen b3, which is trying to defend everything, we are having knight e to d5. We are introducing another knight. And while white pieces are standing on the first rank or being trapped in the corner, okay, the only good piece is obviously the queen. Our pieces are super active and we're going to challenge white's position a lot. This position is already completely winning for black. Oh, sorry, wait, we're looking at knight g7, sorry. Yes, so knight c3, now it's another option. So not to go materialistic taking the pawn, but rather trying to castle as fast as possible, which definitely is more sober approach. But now after knight e5, we're having already a threat of knight f3 and not allowing white to castle. So after queen g7, we have an intermezzo check, king f2, rook g8, attacking the queen. Now queen takes h7. We have knight g5, a tempo move, first of all attacking the queen, and second of all introducing idea of queen f3. Queen a4 is another move. So queen is moving all the way to the a file with the idea of capturing a pawn on a7 and try to save the knight. But then we have knight f3 again. So we can try to take on h2 to target the bishop on f1. So king goes forward to f2, we take. Now there is again a threat of queen f3 check. So in case queen a5 check, we just stop it by playing b6, queen a7. White is trying to grab some material, but we have queen f3, king g1, and now queen g3 check. Bishop g2 is the only way to defend. And knight f3, king f1, knight d2, another check. If king goes to d2, we're taking the bishop. So king has to go to g1. Of course, we can also repeat with a repetition and have a draw, but we have completely winning position. So we go knight c4. And our next move is going to be to take on e3 and attack the bishop on g2. Meanwhile, our king is actually pretty safe because all the pieces around the king are defending it, and there is not much of a trouble there for our king. Even though there is a queen and knight close to the king, it's going to be difficult to checkmate with one or two pieces, since there are many pieces also defending black's king. Bishop b2 is another move. So first of all, this is a sacrifice, sacrificing a rook. But in exchange for that sacrifice, our queen is going to be out of the play, and our knight also on h2. So the question is, should we take it or not? And the question is, yes, of course, we can do it. So now queen a5 check. If we move the king away, we have to be really careful because after knight c7, king f8, queen b4, now the position, the location of our pieces, which is far, far away from the king, is very bad because now there is a very nice pin on our king, and at the next move there is going to be knight d5 jump, and our knight is going to hold with this, our whole position, we're going to lose. So very important in this position not to move the king, but play b6, which also is, I would say it's more logical move than king e8. So b6 makes a lot of sense. The only way for white basically is queen a7. Now h5, it's actually very important to remember it because it's the only winning move for black. Because now we're introducing the rook h6 idea to try to defend on the sixth rank. So after queen b6, king e8, knight e4 is already ready to jump on d6 with some checkmate tricks, but we have rook h6 move, and now it's not happening any longer. So now let's say after knight c7, king f8, knight e6, there is actually a very nice trick, because if we take with a rook, which makes a lot of sense to attack the knight and the queen, but there is queen d8 checkmate. Very, very bad would be to blunder something like this, so we shouldn't blunder. We must play, the only move is f takes e6, so that after queen d8 we have the f7 square. So knight d6 is another move, but king is simply escaping on the very nice h7 square, queen e8, king h7. In case of bishop d3, another check, we have knight h5, and after knight f5, super nice knight rook f6, pinning the knight on f5, so that after queen h5, king g8, after queen e8, it feels like there are no, like, all checks, and we cannot stop checks, but we have rook f8 in this position. The knight is pinned. There is nothing we're going to capture on f5 in the next move. There is also knight g4 and so on, all these moves, and our queen is ready to take one of the pawns and get back into the action, or maybe go somewhere on the first rank. It depends where the king goes. So that was the bishop d3 move. In case knight goes to e4, which makes also a lot of sense, trying idea of the knight coming to g5, which actually would be a checkmate. So we should be really careful, and we play rook g6, blocking this idea. So now knight g5 is not really is not a move, and now we are finally having a safe position. Now there are no checks, no mates. I mean, there are some checks, but we are taking the piece. There is no check, there is no mate, and we are managed to stabilize while we have an extra material in this position, and king of white is going to be an issue very soon. So that was basically all the queen g4 move, which is also interesting, targeting the g7 square. But queen d6 is the main move, because now it threatens not only queen c7 check, but also queen f8, and taking on g7 and so on. So there are many nice threats. So in this position we go for knight f6. Knight g7 is also possible, it's also a move, but knight f6 makes more sense, because from f6 first of all, knight f6 has more squares to jump to, like knight e4, knight g4, and so on. But another idea is that after some checks, we have a square on e7 to hide with a king, which could be crucial in some of the lines. So let's start. In case of queen c7 check, we go king e7, knight c3, rook f3, and we are going to transpose to the main line, to the knight c3 move. So let's start with knight d2. Now, it is actually the most common move in the position after knight e7. But in this position is particularly bad because we have knight e8. Very interesting move. Taking the queen, defending the square on c7. Now queen has to go back. Queen f4. Now we're in time to capture a pawn on h2, since after castle we have queen h6, offering a trade of the queens. And of course, if we're going to trade the queens, we're going to win in the endgame due to the material. I mean, first of all, we are currently we currently are pawn up, but due to the knight on a8, we're going to win it pretty soon, and we're going to have an extra piece. So queen f7, trying to grab a pawn. We take on e3, king b1. Now we take another pawn. We shouldn't be afraid because our king is fully defended. Knight is jumping forward, trying to create some threat, but we have queen g4, just removing the queen from the attack, also defending on d7 in some cases, knight c3, and now h5, and we are ready to rush with the pawn all the way to h1. Our rook can join via the 6th rank, and, well, the position is just completely winning for black. So that was knight d2 move. Knight c3, in case knight develops on c3, is definitely much better move for white. The knight is more active on c3, there are more threads from the square, there are more jumps. So what should we do? We have to return back, but the idea is not only that we are returning, but also that we are blocking the king from castling. We are making the king stay in the position in the center for some time. So queen c7 checks look very logical. King e7, just moving it away, and also one of our ideas is to bring the rook to e8 and bring the king to f8 to the safety. So in case of e4, let's say this move is not threatening us anything, we're just ready to play rook e8 and king f8 in the next move, and we're completely fine with our king, while white has an issue since the king is still in the center. So rook d1 is another move, putting more pressure on d7, also creating a threat of queen d6. So here already rook e8 would not make sense. We have to take the pawn on e3 with a check, bishop b2, and now queen c5. We're stopping the idea of queen d6, and now we're threatening to bring the rook again somewhere to e8 to d8, and our king would hide on f8. So let's say queen f4 is played. Now we go for d6. And after knight c7, knight is trying to get back. We're having bishop e6. We're still kind of stopping the knight to come out, but even if knight is managing to get out, like we are b5, let's say, we still have a better pawn structure. Okay, we have an extra pawn. Let's not forget about that. We have a nice position, clear advantage for black. That was rook d1. Queen f4. Basically, queen f4 is the most popular move. Almost every game is continuing like this. There is not much better. But it feels like the end game is not going to be very good for white, but they're still going for it. So queen e4 and e takes f4. And here I would like to ask you, what is the move that black should play? Please stop the video and try to find the best move. So I hope you found it. Definitely there is one move which would be a threat. It's bringing the knight out to c7. So king d8 makes a lot of sense. Blocking this idea, controlling the c7 square. And now we're threatening in the next couple of moves, try to win the knight on a8. So that's why white has to do something in order to save this beautiful knight. So castle is first played. Then we are ready to go for h5. Breaking with h4, trading this for a pawn, and also the idea is definitely to activate our rook from the ha square on the 2nd rank or somewhere on the 5th rank. So h3, the very good move, because now after h4, white is ready to react with the g4 move. Now we cannot really open the h file any longer. So, but now we play rook h6. We're entering with the rook via h6. So our ideas also could be to go for the knight after playing something like b6, bishop b7, and taking the knight on a8. Even though we have to be a bit careful because there are jumps with the knight are possible. They're in the picture. So at some moment we will also have most likely some a6 move. So in case knight b5 going immediately, then we have d5, because it was actually already very dangerous. I believe that knight d6 was already an idea in this position, bringing the knight, attacking also the pawn, the bishop. So we have to go for d5, and also we are opening our bishop at the same time. So if c4 is played, then we have bishop g4, rook d2, moving the rook away, and now rook e8, creating a threat of rook e1, which would win a material. So c takes d5, and now knight b4. We gave up the pawn basically, but we are going to win the position because rook e1 is a huge threat. It's actually going to be a checkmate in 2. Also, knight a2 is a threat, and taking on d5 is also possible, as well as bringing the king to b8 and playing a6 to kick this knight and win the knight on a8 is another option. So knight a8 to c7. White is trying to escape with a knight, but the only problem is that this knight are connected, and it's not possible actually to jump away with a knight. Okay, the only opportunity is of course to take the pawn on d5. So that's why we must play d4. Because if we play a6, then after knight d5, we're just going to lose a pawn, and actually is white going to be the one who is winning due to the beautiful rook on d file and very nice position. So that's why d4 is a must play move, so there is no knight b5, d5 any longer, and a6 is actually a huge threat in this position. So knight b5, we looked. In case of b4, this is actually a very good move. It's a correct way for white to go, because first of all, white has to try to challenge the knight from c6, and then go for all the ideas with the knight b5. So wait a second. Yeah, we go with b4. So now knight takes b4. We have to take it because otherwise the pawn is running all the way to b5. Knight b5 goes forward. Now there is already a threat to the pawn on a6. Also knight d6 is an idea. And now we go knight g4. We are attacking the pawn on h2. We're creating some threats of knight e3. Also knight f2 potentially, but mostly knight e3 obviously. And well, in this position, it's going to be difficult to try to win the knight on a8 because white is actually going to escape. So we can try, of course, but white is going to escape. So meanwhile, we bring the knight. We also can bring the rook all the way to h6 rank. And of course, there is a pleasant advantage for black due to the extra pawn in this position and the problem of the knight on a8. So let's see how the game could continue. For example, bishop e2, knight d3, rook d2, and we take on a2, king b2, and knight b4 back, jumping all the way back, knight d6, and here we will play rook f8, defending the pawn on f7. We have a great position. And again, knight is still on a8. Okay, it's probably unlikely that we're going to win the knight, but it's still there. So definitely some chances for black, considering we're still up a pawn. And in this position, we are actually up 2 pawns, but definitely due to the piece activity, there is some compensation for one. But black is having comfortable position and chances for a win here. So this line was the knight b5 move, which we're looking at. So now another move which we'll look is knight takes on c6, another option. It's a pretty bad move because now we have bishop takes e3, so knight is not attacking any queen on d8, so we take on e3, fe, then we capture the knight with the pawn, and we're getting to this very nice pawn structure where white has doubled isolated pawn in the center. So knight c3, trying to develop a piece, we have immediate queen h4. Queen h4 is very typical when there is this pawn structure. We already had similar position. So g3 feels like a normal move, and now we cannot take, of course, on e4 any longer, so we have to bring the queen back to e7. Makes a lot of sense because it puts enormous amount of pressure and also x-ray against the king. Bishop g2 trying to defend the pawn, very logical. knight f6, castle, castle, and well, our position is just great. We are clearly better because we are ready to bring the bishop out, put the knight and blockade these pawns on the beautiful e5 square. Also, our rooks are going to jump to the open file of d file. We're going to put maybe another rook to e file, and so on and so forth. Queen d4 is an interesting move because now white is offering a trade of the queens so that the pawns are going to be undoubled. The pawns are going to be beautiful central pawns. So that's why we don't really want that, right? Now we go for queen h4. We make this check again. So why does this move make sense? Also because it's weakening some light squares, which could be potentially important. So that's why playing queen h4 generally is good, especially in these pawn structures where we can weaken f3 a lot. Okay, queen g5, we're moving away, defending on d7 at the same time because queen was attacking the pawn. And now knight d2, white is just developing, knight f6, long castle, short castle. And now we're reaching the position where we have a clear advantage due to the pawn structure. Again, these double pawns are not looking good. We're going to put an enormous amount of pressure on the pawns. We can easily develop the bishop to g4 or e6, bring the rooks out to d8 to e8, putting pressure on the pawn on e4 as well. So great position for black. c3 is another move, just trying to defend the knight, and it's his main move in this variation. So here the question is, how should we continue? And the point is that the main line in this position is going to go with move knight g7. Knight g7, it makes a lot of sense, developing the knight, defending on c6. I mean, it's a great move. There is nothing to talk about it. That's why it's a main line. But not always we have to go for the main line. So in this position, we're going for an interesting option. We're playing d6. So main idea of the move is that we are not rushing with knight to e7 because we still have some lines where our knight could be useful on f6. If we would have a chance to move our queen to g6 with a tempo, attacking the pawn on e4 and attacking the pawn on g2, and then we would jump with a knight to f6 to double the pressure on the e4 pawn. So that's why we are not yet rushing. We're playing d6, which is a very useful move. It's defending the bishop on c5. It's also making a development of the bishop from c8 possible. So this is actually a very nice idea. So here there are again many moves for white. White can move the knight away again. There could be a developing move with the bishop or even g3. So of course, the main moves, which I would consider, is developing moves with a bishop. And also since the d6 move is not so popular, white might react in the same way they would react on knight g7, but we're going to look at it a little bit later. So let's start with knight b5. First of all, developing, targeting the c7 square. Similar to the previous line, we can take on e3, we are in time. Pawn takes, has to take because white is not in time to take on c7. And after queen h4 check, g3, we have queen e7. We are not taking the pawn yet, but we can even defend on c7. In the next move, we most likely are going to kick the knight from b5 and then put more pressure on the e4 pawn. So knight c2, going all the way back. It's pretty passive move. I mean, of course, it would be ideal for white that we take on e3 and knight captures and standing perfectly, but we are not really taking on e3 soon. But so let's say we go bishop d2, bishop d7, developing the bishop. Just we are not in the rush. And also, if white is taking on c5, there is no real problem, because after bishop takes, pawn takes, knight d2, long castle, queen e2, and knight g7, we have a good pawn structure. Position is nice. It's around equal. We can bring the knight to g6 to control the e5 and f4 squares. Also, our rook is already on semi-open file. The other rook could come also to e8 and so on. So position looks good. At least there are no problems for black. So knight d2 immediately. Then we go for a long castle, bishop e2. Okay, and now we are ready to take, because after take on e3, knight takes, we have queen e5 move with immediate challenge of knight coming to f6, because there is no f4 now kicking the queen away. So we have idea of knight with bringing the knight to f6 and then bringing the rook all the way to e8, targeting the pawn on e4. So there is, of course, no problem for black. Of course, black is also not better, not like winning or something, but there are no problems, just equality. G3 is another option to develop the bishop all the way to G2, which maybe is not, I mean, maybe it makes some sense, but the problem is going to be in following. We go for queen G6, targeting the pawn on E4, and now bishop G2, follow up, of course. And in this position, it's pretty, I mean, and generally against this G3 bishop on G2, against the fianchetto, we have ideas to go with the pawn to H4. So we play H5 with the idea of going all the way to H4, because of course, knight cannot go back to defend from H4 pawn coming due to the problem on E3. So H3 would play, the only move which would stop the H4 by playing G4. So now H4 doesn't make sense any longer, but now we go knight F3. And now we put more pressure on the E4 square. And since the H3 pawn move was played, it weakens the G3 square, even though it feels like it's all defended, but G3 square is weakened, and this pawn will never be able to push forward due to the problem on G3. So now these pawns are going to stay like this. They're pinned to each other. So for example, once we attack on E4, there is never going to be a move like F3. So now knight D2, trying to defend. Now we go bishop D7. We're going for a long castle. And for example, here, there is definitely the castle move, which is possible, but it would be a mistake, because now after H4, G4, we have a beautiful move, knight takes G4, because after pawn takes, we have bishop takes, targeting the queen. And after F3, we move the bishop away, threaten H3 due to the pin, and the position of white's king is going to collapse very soon. The position is winning for black. Queen E2, trying to create an idea of, long castle. White is trying to be maybe a bit more flexible, saying, okay, maybe a short castle, maybe a long castle. And of course, also defending the bishop on E3 at home. And so we long castle. Now white is short castling, and now we go H4 again. So knight C6, taking the knight, bishop takes, bishop C5, DC, doubling our pawns, but it's not a big problem. And now going for G4. And now again we have a sacrifice, because after knight G4, pawn takes, we have H3, attacking the bishop on G2. It is forced to go from the file, and it's very critical, because after bishop F3, we have a beautiful move, F5. And there are big problems, because a lot of pieces are kind of hanging right now. Of course, it's not completely winning position of black or something, but the situation is kind of critical here, because after pawn takes on f5, then there is a bishop f3 threat, and if knight takes, then we have queen g4. So definitely attack is ongoing for black, and there are big chances to win due to the weakness of the king. So that was queen e2 we discussed. Now we go into the b4 territory. A very interesting idea for white. Of course, the main move, the main idea of this b4 is to sacrifice a pawn, because after bishop d4, white is forced to take with the pawn, and now we capture the pawn on b4. And after queen b3, the problem is that white is getting initiative and position is going to be better. So we are not there to capture pawns. We just move the bishop back to b6. Makes a lot of sense. Now a4, bishop d4. We are now ready to take, because now after bishop d4, bishop d4. And in case, in case pawn would take on d4, then we would take the pawn. And after the queen b3, we would just play a5. blockading the knight. There would be no a3 move any longer. So now since a4 is on the board, we can go for it, but bishop takes d4. And now we castle, bishop e3, and we bring the rook out to the e8, x-raying the king. b5, challenging our knight. Knight has to go, but it goes to the central square. Very nice one. Knight e5, castle, and we go again with h4. And now again, problems are starting for white, because in case of g4, we again have a sacrifice. We always have sacrifice on g4. Pawn takes, and we push immediately h3. The main idea after bishop takes h3, bishop g4, bishop takes, knight takes. Now we're getting completely winning position because there are two files, open files against the king. We have threats of knight jumping anywhere like g3, f2, and so on. So even if king moves away, we have rook e5, rook h5, and it looks like position. The king is just going to get mated in a couple of moves. So queen e2, trying not to play this g4 move. But now, for example, if we try to win a pawn on g3 by taking it, because it feels like, okay, if pawn takes, we can take with a queen or do something else. But it's actually not true, because after h takes g3, there is f4, very strong move, intermediate, attacking our knight. And we have huge problems because there is no other single square where our knight can go. So white is winning. So knight h5, we put more pressure against the g3 pawn. Now, the thing is that we put a lot of pressure, and in case g4 is happening again, there could be some sacrifices there. The position of the white's king is a bit under pressure due to all our pieces attacking it. So yeah, very nice position for black to play. Definitely, I would say it's around equal, but we have huge initiative. That was the g3 move. Bishop c4 is not the worst move, but this move is the most common in the position when black is starting with knight g7. So if we play knight g7, then bishop c4 is normally the move. But after d6, the problem is that this bishop c4 is not good, and it could happen actually very likely against you. Someone could play it because they know this move is working against knight g7, and maybe d6 is similar, so this move could work, and normally this is what played. But here we have the interesting idea of knight e5 attacking the bishop and jumping to g4. So now bishop has to go away. If bishop goes to b3, we have queen g6. Now we're challenging both pawns on e4 and g2. And now it's not going to be easy to defend it, because, for example, after rook g1, we're going to capture on e4, then queen knight e2, and queen g4. We're offering a trade of the queens. It's actually almost the only square where queen can go, and we're having just an extra pawn, enjoying it. And in case of castle, so the thing here is taking on e4 would not make too much sense, but there is another tactical idea. Let's not forget we have a bishop on c8. So now we have bishop h3, and basically there is no way to defend on g2 without pushing the pawn forward. So we're going to win an exchange and the game eventually. So bishop e2 makes a bit more sense. Bishop is coming back on the same diagonal. Potentially, bishop could defend two pawns by bishop f3, and also it's controlling the g4 square. But now we have queen g6 immediately attacking both pawns. If bishop f3 is happening, then we have knight f3 putting more pressure. So that's the whole idea of the d6 move, that knight f6 is possible. Knight d2, castle, castle, and rook e1, putting even more pressure against the e4 pawn. Due to this location of our pieces, knight on f6, queen on g6, and rook on e8, the position is just amazing for black. We already have threats of taking on f3 and winning the pawn on e4 in a couple of moves. Knight b5. This is not. This is a move again in the same spirit of targeting on c7. It's not really solving many problems, but white is just trying to play pretty sharp and just try to complicate the position. So we take on g2, rook f1, and now we take the bishop. Knight c7 intermezzo. So now, of course, the problem would be that if we play king d8, that d6 is hanging, so we have to play king d7, super important. we are attacking the knight. So now knight a8 and bishop f4. We go away. We go away with the bishop. And now we're in this position. We are down on exchange. But the thing is that we have a big, huge pieces like on e5 and f4. Pieces are very active. Also queen on g2. And the knight on a8 could be the piece which we can trap later. So let's say queen a4 would be played, trying immediately to challenge the a8, a7 pawn with the idea of a knight getting out. So king a7, we move the king away. Now knight a7 has to be played to try to get out with a knight on d5. Knight f6 stopping this idea. In case knight e2, we have bishop g4, bringing another piece to an attack, and also creating a problem for white, because white would love to castle now, but white cannot. So in case bishop queen b5, which would attack at the same time and also defend the bishop on e2, rook c8 would be a very nice move, attacking the knight. Queen b7 looks logical, defending the knight, but already stopping defending the bishop on e2. So we go king f1, removing the queen from the king from this x-ray. Rook d1, now bishop h3, putting even more pressure on the rook on f1. And after knight d5, queen d5, we have a very nice move, g5. We're just continuing with our attack, defending the bishop. Also, potentially, we're ready to push forward. The white's pieces are pretty much stuck. White is up a material, but the white's pieces are stuck around the king, and we're having attack against it, which of course bring us to the winning position for black. So that was knight b5. So in case of castle, these moves are pretty much similar to the knight g to e7. So here, the point is that if we take the pawn on e4, then we're going to get into some trouble, since after b4, bishop b6, a4, a6, a5, bishop a7, white has already improved a lot on the queen side, bringing a lot of space. So b5, the position would be very dangerous for black, because we lack the development. Our bishop is in trouble on a7, and well, if we take, then of course, like it's not going to be definitely easy for black. White is slightly better. So here we have bishop h3, again threatening the checkmate and attacking the rook if pawn moves. But it's not forced, because in this position there is bishop f3 defending the pawn. So now the plus, whenever bishop comes to f3, the advantage of the move is that f4 is not going to be played, at least in the near future. But of course, move is good because it's defending the pawn on g2 and defending the pawn on e4. So now we go with the knight to f6, attacking the pawn on e4. Again, that's advantage over the knight g7 variation, where we cannot attack on e4 so easily. So in case of knight f5, we take the bishop, we trade them, and after long castle, we are going to start pushing the h pawn and create more and more attack against the king on the king side. So knight d2, another move. We have here knight h5, bringing the knight all the way into the position, creating threats of taking on f3, because right now, if it was white to move, we would already be able to take on f3, and if queen takes, then let me try to play some random move. So now we take the bishop. The problem is you cannot take with a knight because there is a checkmate, so queen is forced to take, but after queen takes, the queen is actually trapped in f3. So that's why it's not really good. Not really good position. So king h1, trying to introduce a threat of taking the bishop on h3, so we have to remove it. We go away with the bishop all the way to d7, which is a perfect square for the bishop for now. Knight d2, and now we go h5. We are creating a square where our knight could be very nice from g4, attacking the knight on the bishop on e3. Also, we are attacking the pawn on e4. We are ready to long or short castle. It's going to depend. We can decide. Probably makes more sense to long castle to create attack against the king, keeping the rook on h8 and bringing the other rook, let's say, from d8 to the e file, targeting the pawn on e4. That was bishop e2. Now we're going for knight d2 move. So knight d2 is just defending the bishop, but looks very strange, this move, because normally you want to try to keep the bishop, not to give it back. But white is developing with this move, so they are kind of fine with a take. But we're not taking, we're playing queen g6, attacking the e4 and g2 pawns. So here, castle is possible, because with castle, white is defending at least the pawn on g2. Now we go bishop a3 again, and the problem is, again, no other good move than ag3, and we are winning an exchange. So g3 by itself, then we have knight f6, targeting the pawn on e4, and let's not forget that the light squares are already pretty weak for white. So f3 is being played, and now we short castle. A lot of weaknesses for white, so position is not so easy, and we're getting this line with g3 but without bishop on g2, which could weaken even position of the king. We are ready to go for the rook e8 with the idea of d5 at some moment, so yeah, definitely big problems for white. Bishop f1 is actually objectively is the best move. It's the find of the computer, but it's going to be, I don't think that we're going to meet a lot of people who would play this move. It's not, I mean, it's definitely possible to find, but it's not really human to bring the bishop all the way back. Well, you know that you kind of have to castle, but of course it's possible. So bishop f1 is the best move. Now we go with knight f6, targeting the pawn on e4. And basically we want the tempo in this position, because bishop was developed on c4, we attacked it, knight defended, and then bishop went all the way back. So now we got the position with a knight on d2, knight on e5, and queen on g6, while nothing else changed for white. So knight f6, we are targeting the pawn on e4. f4 has to be played. f3 would be a bit too slow and a bit too passive. So f4 is a move how white should continue. Now we go knight g4, of course, targeting the bishop and attacking on e4. Queen f3, defending both the bishop and the pawn. So we capture the bishop, queen takes, and castle. So now we have a bishop pair. We want a bishop pair. We're ready to bring the rook all the way to the e file, where we are going to have a nice x-ray on the queen, maybe also king, also targeting the pawn on, also targeting the pawn on e4. So that's also going to be another idea. And yeah, white is definitely much worse in this position. This was bishop c4, so now bishop e2. Normal move, just developing the bishop, and pretty much fine, not allowing this knight e5 with a tempo. So now queen g6, again, we're going for similar idea, targeting both pawns. If bishop goes to f3, we have bishop d7. So idea is, of course, that we take on c6 with the bishop, and eventually we can also long castle, also some moment controlling the b5 square, so that, for example, after knight b5, we're going to have long castle defending the pawn on c7. So if short castle, now knight e5, we're again jumping with the knight, also targeting the bishop on f3. b4, attacking the bishop. Bishop has to go away, a4. Now, if we're playing a5, the problem is that after bishop h5, we have to take, I mean, we don't really have other good move with the queen, and all the other moves are bad, like queen f6. So we have to take the pawn, but then after knight d2, queen h4, bishop goes back. The position is getting a bit shaky for black, because our development is not the best in this particular moment. We want the pawn, but we have issues like, let's say, on b7, the bishop is getting super good on f3, so we shouldn't allow something like this, and we must play knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4, at the same time stopping bishop h5 ideas. So now the question is, what happens after a5? Well, first let's look at knight e2. If knight e2 is played, then we can go a5 already, because we control the h5 square. But if white is going for a4, which is the main challenge, then we are taking on d4. Bishop takes, I mean, there is no other move than that. And we take on f3, queen is forced to take, we're winning a pawn. And the point is that if white is trying to regain the pawn instantly with bishop takes g7, then we have a very nice rook g8 move, attacking the bishop on on g7, and also creating threats later on g2 squared. So let's say rook e1, then we have f5, which would defend the knight on e5, where in e4 we're ready to long castle. Sorry, not there, but long castle. In the next move, play bishop c6, and white is just going to collapse here. If rook e1 immediately, which also brings a lot of sense. But then we have f5 immediately defending the knight on e4. There is no f3, that's very important. Knight e2 trying to attack the knight, but we have a short castle. And the whole point of this line is that after knight takes, we don't take on e4, but we play bishop c6, pinning the queen. And now our position is already around equal because we're going to take the piece back. We're up a pawn, but the bishop is super strong on d4 because at the same time it's attacking on g7 and defending on f2. So that was the bishop e3 variation. Let's look what happens after castle, because a castle also is possible. So here, of course, if we would start maybe taking a pawn, it's not going to be that great, because after take, there is bishop f3 immediately, and actually we are losing because c6 is going to fall. So we have to play knight f6. It's our move, which we most likely always play after queen g6 because we target the pawn on e4. So now if rook e1, just developing move, the point is that what white is trying to say, that taking on e4 is very dangerous. So that's why we try to do something. For example, if we castle short, then there is knight c6, bc. Okay, now bc has to be played because if we take on e3, there is knight e7. So bc is must played, but now after bishop c5, dc5 f3, we have a very beautiful pawn structure, beautiful. So that's not something what we want to achieve, definitely. We are much worse in this position. So that's why we have to be ready for this knight c6 jump. That's also what is very challenging in this line generally, to be always ready that this knight c6 take is working. I mean, that for black, that it's working, so that after knight c6 we have bishop e3. And in this position, for example, losing control would be very easy. Playing castle would be very easy, and then suddenly knight c6 and we're getting much worse position. So here that's why very important to go for knight g4. We're attacking the bishop on e3. So now if bishop g4, taking our knight, bishop takes, pawn f3, now we go for bishop a3, creating more weaknesses for white. Because the point is, of course, if g3 is played, then there are more weaknesses on the light squares. So white has to defend with a piece, playing queen c2, defending on g2 for a checkmate. We castle short. Now already this idea with knight c6 is not going to work due to intermezzo check on e3. Rook takes, and now bc. Okay, we have double pawns, but we would always have this double pawns, or almost always, so it's not such a big deal. So king h1, and now bishop e6 going away. Well, we have an absolutely fine position. We have also an open b file. We can use it for attack on the pawn at some moment. White is still not developed the knight and the rook. Generally, bishop should be a better piece in this position because it's not so closed. And okay, there are many ideas for white, for black, definitely. Also, at some moment, breaking the center with f5 could be an idea. But meanwhile, we're just looking. We have to improve our pieces. We have to bring the rooks out. Maybe rook could go also to the 5th rank, and we could build up some attack against the white's king. But the position is around equal. Not much to say. So f3 trying to defend everything, but this move is going to not only stop the g4 and protecting on e4, but also it's going to make the bishop kind of bad on e2. But at this position, I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. So here, main idea of white is to play in the next move c4, play knight c3, and try to stabilize on the light squares. So that's why we have a chance, which we shouldn't miss, and this is playing d4 immediately. Just before white could play this c4, we are managing to break the center, because now white has to do something about it, because we're targeting the pawn for the 3rd time. So queen d2. Queen d2, the idea is, of course, to defend the bishop on e3, so now these ideas of the jumps are possible. So in case you would play bishop d6, just removing the bishop, well, we put the bishop on the other diagonal, not allowing any problems on c5. Pawn takes, we take on d4, queen takes, and queen a5, h5, targeting here at the same time. Bishop f4 trying to defend, we trade the pieces, knight e5, attacking the queen, queen e4 check, bishop e6, we defended perfectly with the king. And now after c4, we just move with the knight away, queen b7, and now queen c5 was a check at the same time defending on c7. So king h1, we have castle to defend the rook on a8. The position is just fine. There are no issues for black. I would be actually optimistic, but we're currently down a pawn, so it means we have compensation because pieces are much worse for white. But anytime we can also take the piece back, so we shouldn't worry too much about that. D takes e4 is better. It's possible. But it is going to be more initiative for black for sure in this line. So the line of bishop d6 was a little bit more to a like drawish or more equalish positions. So d takes c4, knight takes c6, bishop takes with a check intermezzo, queen e3, and we capture with a b pawn on c6. Knight d2, so white is using the spin against the king, so we have to run away. We castle, and after fe, we go for a5. So we are winning some space on the queen side. We are ready to develop the pieces. We have weaknesses, definitely the c7, c6 are weaknesses. Also e4 is weakness. We are ready to bring the rook to e8, targets the weakness on e4. Bishop would go to e3. Meanwhile, we are ready also to play something like a4, gaining more space on the queen side. The position is more unbalanced than the previous one, and definitely it's possible to go for it with more chances for black. So that was bishop e2 move. And now we go to the main move, which is bishop b5. Makes a lot of sense because it's immediately targeting the knight. That's something what knight on e7 would do. Knight on e7 would defend the knight on c6. So that's why this bishop b5 makes a lot of sense. Developing with a tempo, knight c6 is a huge threat, and trying to anticipate the plan of bringing the queen to g6. So that's why we are forced to go knight g7 now. Now we defended, but already bishop is on g5. So it's already a bit different position, a bit different setup. So castle is happening. Of course, it's possible to take on c6 right away, but we're going to see these lines just one move later. They are going to transpose. So castle happens, castle, and here if bishop c6, pawn takes, knight d2, we have bishop b6, removing the bishop. So why is it good to remove the bishop? First of all, we have an idea of playing c5, and we can go with the queen to g6. And since the knight is already on e7, not on f6, we have ideas of pushing for f5. So there is also another advantage of this setup. If knight takes on c6, we take with the pawn again, bishop c5. Now, of course, we don't take the bishop on c5, but we take the bishop on b5. Very important. cb, bishop goes to d4, and now queen g6, again putting some pressure on the pawns on the light squares. In case of f4, very important that we have f5 immediately targeting the pawn on e4. So rook e3, we have rook f7. We are having ideas of playing bishop b7 in the next move. So rook from f7 very nicely defending the problem on g7, so that after rook g3 we can just move queen away and not bother about the g7 square. Knight d2 is developing a piece at the same time defending a pawn, makes a lot of sense. So now c5, we're going forward with all the pawns, we're getting more space on the queen side. Bishop e3, and now f5. Now again breaking the pawn on e4. After the pawns are being traded, we are not having any problems. We have majority on the queen side, which most likely is going to be easier to convert in the endgame. But again, the position is around equal. There are chances for both sides, but I would be still optimistic for black. Rook e1, developing the piece and also kind of keeping this pawn under control. So now we have to do something because already all the threats are there taking on on c6 at some moment. So we go for a6, asking the bishop where does it want to go. So if knight takes on c6, we have to ab, because after knight c7, knight e7 check, queen e7. If bishop takes c5, dc, we're having this very interesting pawn structure where we have doubled pawns, but it's actually very good because the pawns are going to defend each other and help each other to push forward. So it could be a very good pawn structure on the queen side, which we would push slowly but confidently in the endgame. So knight d2 is a possibility, but then we have bishop d7, which we're just developing a piece. Of course, we're having a completely fine position. At some moment, we have to look at such ideas of f5, but for now, it's not really working because of the x3. So we're just going to see this position just depending on how our opponent is also playing. And well, position is around equal with equal chances for a win. Bishop takes c6, then bc, and after knight d2, we go for a5. Again, similar ideas, just grabbing more space so that b4 is also not an issue. Our bishop can be developed on a6. It also can be developed on d7. Again, queen g6 is also a possibility. Pushing for the f5 break is as well possible. Again, the position is full of opportunities for black. So bishop goes to f1 probably would be better. So from f1, bishop is defending the pawn on g2 at some moment. It's also not standing in the way, and white is keeping the bishop pair. So here we go, rook e8, knight c6, bishop c5. So double pawn indeed happens, but the one which is we are used to. So knight e2, now defending the pawn on e4. And now we go bishop e6. We're just developing a piece. Again, we have majority on the queen side. Yes, we have double pawns, but it doesn't mean much. It's not easy for white to push their king side majority. So, I mean, the position is around equal. There are going to be a fight in the end game for both chances. But the most important that we don't have problems. So f4, very dynamic move, immediately saying that white wants to push for f5 in case if there is some queen g6 move, then there is going to be always f5. And well, the pawns are strong. Let's not forget about that. So we have to know how to properly react on it. And again, we still have this, this hanging opportunity of some takes. Okay, not exactly here because the bishop would hang on e3, but generally. So we go with the bishop to b6. What is the idea of this move? It's very actually interesting move because it feels like that the knight was not attacked, but we moved it away. First of all, it introduces ideas of later capturing the knight on d4, and after pawn takes, that there is no attack. It's not the tempo on the bishop, so we could immediately strike in the center. The other idea is, of course, that there is no like attack with a b4 move, and well, mostly it's just against this tempo move. So and also, of course, the bishop is not hanging on c6 in any lines any longer. So if king goes away to h1, so it's introducing again this knight c6 idea. So knight c6 takes on e7. Then we are ready finally to go with a d5, trying to break on the light squares. So e5, going forward, weakening the light squares meanwhile. I mean, rather like this. So we go with queen of f6, because if we go to g6, g5, f5 would follow. So now queen h6 idea is that the bishop is not defended on e3, and we have already opportunity of taking on e5. Queen d2, defending the bishop makes a lot of sense. We take on d4. So cd4 makes the most sense, and now we have knight f5. We are in time to block on the light squares with the knight, also attacking the bishop. So it's very nice position. We have ideas of playing like f6. Our bishop is pretty nice. We can play c6 as well, trying to put a very nice pawn structure. Breaking the pawn structure with f6 move is definitely there as well. Our pieces are fine, and I would prefer in this position black, definitely. So how the game could continue is, for example, after bishop f2, f6, breaking the center, then knight c3, trying to also attack the pawn on d5 because we also have our weaknesses. We have fe, pawn takes on e4, on e5, sorry, bishop f2, rook f2, and now we have d4, attacking the knight. Knight has to go to e4, but now we have knight e3, very nice move. And the main idea is, of course, that the pawn cannot be taken since there is knight g4 threat of taking the rook and the checkmate threat on g2, on h2, which is the most important in the position. So yeah, we have great position already, even slightly better. And yeah, I definitely love the position for black. In case white is defending, we can always defend the pawn on d4. But of course, there is also rook f4 in the picture. I mean, there are many moves, there are many attacking opportunities against the king of white. So that was king h1. So in case of queen d2, which is also at the same time defending the bishop on e3, and well, it's just developing move. Now we take on d4, and if bishop takes, then the point is that it looks, oh, bishop is attacking the queen, we must take. But the most important is not to take automatically the bishop, but we have another idea. We can play d5 again, challenging the light squares of white. So now white has to do something. If white is taking on e5, then white is losing fight for the light squares. So white is going for e5, but e5 is weakening light squares a lot. So now we go queen g6. Queen g6 pointing out the light squares. And yeah, of course, anytime, for example, some bishop d3 is played, we always have bishop f5 in the position. So it's not going to create any problems for us. So let's look what happens after cd. We push for d5 again. Again, we are creating the blockade on the light square so that the pawns are not marching forward. e5 makes a lot of sense. Queen g6, again, pointing out the light squares and just moving the queen away. So in case of bishop d3, we have bishop f5, similar to the previous line. And in case of rook f3, actually, it's a very important position. So here we go for c6, rook g3 intermezzo, and here we go queen f6. In case of bishop d3, very important to play the next move, because if we just play knight f6, being a bit irresponsible, after knight f5, bishop takes, queen takes, rook g5, super strong move, targeting the queen. And now after queen goes away, let's say queen goes to e4, the queen is actually trapped. So if queen goes back, there is f5, and the pawn structure is super strong for white. There are going to be millions of moves. There is going to be also f6 in the position. So very, very tough for black. So we shouldn't get there. That's why first we should play f6, challenging the pawn structure, at the same time taking away the g5 square. Since after knight c3, knight f5, bishop f5, queen f5, there is no longer this very sneaky rook g6 move, or rook g5 move, and then we just really blockaded on the light squares. Light squares are there, full blockade. We have a bishop pair. For now, the position is kind of close. They're not really working, but in the future they're going to be, because most likely some take is going to happen on e5. And of course, for example, after we take here, after we take on e5 at some moment, if d pawn takes on e5, then we're going to have actually two pawns on the c and d file, which would be really nice. And if the other pawn takes, then we will have opportunity always to break this pawn with d pawn with a c pawn if we want, and win on e5. So it's definitely an interesting position, and of course better for black. So knight c3 is another move, just developing, and okay, also taking away the square on e4, also looking a little bit, keeping an eye on d5 square. So c6 looks very logical, attacking the bishop, defending the pawn, creating very nice pawn structure on the queen side. The bishop goes away to e2. Now we have h5, bringing the idea is to bring bishop to the g4 square, trading the light squared bishop, which would be very nice. And the next move, of course, we have an idea of breaking the pawn chain of white with move like f6, threatening to take it. And okay, again, as I was talking earlier, if white is taking with a d pawn, there is going to be actually the two passers on the c and d file, which would be really nice. And if f pawn takes, then we have c5 break opportunities. So again, great opportunities with chances for both sides, but I would again take black here. This is all about this chapter. Now let us look through some key moments and key positions from this chapter. So this position happened after a trade on e3, after knight b5, trade on e3. So we have a threat of knight coming to c7, but we're not actually responding to that. First, we're introducing a check. So this queen h4 is generally very useful move because after g3, okay, if king goes to d2, of course, we achieved something that the king is not going to castle, but after g3, we achieved weakening of the light squares, which could be important for the future. And generally, with a such pawn structure, we prefer to have this g3 played because now g3 is f3 is completely weak. The pawns are super weak, and now we can either take on e4. In some lines where d6 is already played, we can bring the rook back, the queen back to e7. In this line, we take on e4 with an attack on the rook. So that would be again this funny line where knight is taking on c7, taking the rook on 8, we take the other rook, and so on. So both sides are capturing all on the opposite king and queen side. So this position is basically the key in this chapter because this is where we kind of deviate from the main move. Main move is knight g7 in this position, which we're not going for. We're trying to be a bit more tricky. We're playing the move d6 in this position. So the main idea of d6, I will repeat once again. We are not rushing with a move placement, with a square placement for the knight. So we might place even knight later on f6 because we have an idea of playing queen g6, targeting the e4, g7, and then bringing the knight all the way to f6, again targeting these squares, and also d6 defending the bishop on c5 at some moment. It's also very important. And if white is not reacting properly, but if white is reacting the same way as knight in knight g7 line, then white can get into trouble pretty early on. This is a setup where white is deciding to bring the bishop to g3. Very thematic idea and very topical. There is no knight on f3, and also if knight goes to f3, we're going to spoil the structure. So we have an opportunity of going for h5, h4 ideas. So of course, if white is reacting like with playing h4, then we're going to have a very nice control over the g4 square. Also, g3 is going to be weaker. But if h3 is played, again, g3 is weaker, and now f pawn, it's most likely that pawn is going to stay on f2. It's not going to be pushed anytime soon because its function is going to be to defend the g3 pawn. So that's why this move is also very nice. The next position is white developed with the bishop to c4. Again, this is a move which white is playing against the knight g7 line. So it's something which might happen very commonly. It also happened in games against me. So bishop c4 was played because it's the most common move against the knight g7 variation. And if someone is facing the d6 for the first time, they most likely will go for it unless they know the d6 move or understand the ideas during the game. So here we have knight e5, immediately challenging the bishop. Bishop has to go somewhere. And after bishop goes, let's say on e2, we have queen g6 targeting the boss, the g2 and e4 pawns. And the next move, we are ready to develop the knight to f6. So we have just a great position. And this trick with d6 worked out because we managed to get what we wanted, bringing the knight to f6. Queen is on g6, targeting the g2 and e4. Pretty nice position for black. Next position is after take. So we remove the bishop, then we took on d4. Pawn takes, and now we have to do something against the center, because if we keep the center like this, if we let white play, let's say knight c3 and so on, then we are not getting anywhere, because we're just going to lose basically this game due to the strong center. That's why we have to break the center instantly with the d5 as fast as possible. We have to be dynamic. And now if white is taking on d5, of course, it's going to be a big problem. Then going to be all pawns are going to be weak and light squares will be also weak. So e5 looks like the most sense. And after queen g6, we're taking control over the f5 squares and e4 square. Our bishop is ready to jump to f5, or knight can jump to f5. We can play c6 move and so on and so forth. If bishop goes to d3, we have bishop f5. So we have just a great position, and at some moment we can also put pressure against g2, but for now it's nothing because pawn is defended. But generally we have these ideas in the picture. And the final position is the last position which we look at. It is the position where bishop goes to to the e2 square. The main idea right now for white is going forward with a g4, f5, so we have to stop it by playing h5. Now, in the next move, we are ready to bring the bishop already to the g4 square. Trading the bishop would even weaken more the light squares for black. f6 is another break of the center, which we could also consider. And other than that, we have good pieces. We can locate knight on f5. Queen is good on g6. Bishop is good on b6. It's targeting the d4 square. Potential later it can go away from there, but it's just fine how pieces are located right now. We have definitely counterplay in this position. So I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something today about the Scotch game, about this bishop e3 fifth move, how we should handle it, what should we do. And I'm going to see you in the next chapter. Bye-bye.